one thing that has kept me around with AMC is the fact that Adam Aaron is one of the few CEOs that actually listens to the retail shareholding aspect of the company.
We're live. This is like my first episode with no intro before hitting record. So hey, thank you for joining, Greg. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Hopefully everything is good on your end.
Everything's good. How about you?
Besides the humidity, everything is good.
You're in Pittsburgh, right?
Yep.
Oh, humid out in Pittsburgh. I'm actually in Chicago these days. I just got here like a couple months ago, but I was in Colorado for like a few weeks when I moved. So really just like the first month in Chicago, and it's pretty hot out here, but there's a nice lake that you go jump in, which I did this morning. So all good on this end.
Can't believe you're over in Illinois now.
Yeah, no, I've been in odd places the last year. When did we talk on here last?
I want to say about 4 to 6 months ago.
I want to say 6 months ago. Yeah, I was in Kansas City. I remember the video, and I remember where I was. I was in Kansas City. I just can't remember exactly what time period that was. But either way, it's great to see your face again.
Absolutely, yours too. I'm glad that you're doing well, man.
I'm also glad you're doing well. All right, so I didn't really have a huge agenda for today, but I did want to talk some AMC, get that update. As my podcast has gone a lot of different directions, and I'm talking to a lot of people over Twitter, which I love, but obviously I'm still a big AMC guy, and I want to keep getting AMC out in the ether as much as I can, and you and Ape Radio, and those are my people. Actually, Jay Brown, one of my people, that's why we're on StreamYard. We just had trouble figuring out how to get on the right link here. He's the one that recommended StreamYard. I had him on because we were going to do Zoom. He's like, no, this is way better. It's a clearer picture. You can download separate videos for each person, and that's how we got to this link today. But if we were talking AMC 6 months ago versus now, I feel like a lot has happened. The lawsuits I'd love to talk about, get an update from your perspective on what you know about that, all the way up through Barbie and Oppenheimer just came out. And I think, honestly, even talking some of that, like the marketing that's been going on around those is really cool, but in a lot of different directions. But let's start there before I list everything out. How about we talk about this lawsuit? Do you know anything about it?
So basically, what blocking out all of the noise, the outside noise, what the lawsuit pertains to, it is disputing the conversion and reverse split. Now, however, a settlement was reached. So these hearings that we just recently experienced at the end of June for AMC was basically just, getting input on why you are for or against the settlement for between AMC and Allegheny Pension Fund. Also, I do apologize. I live in Allegheny County, so I do apologize on their behalf.
Whoa.
Yeah. So as soon as I heard it was Allegheny Pension Fund, I was like, why? So and not to get into the intricacies of what the settlement is. I mean, basically, it's like in a way like kind of like a forward split in a way, because for every 7.5 shares, I believe that you hold, you get an extra share on top of it upon the conversion or reverse split. But what we've been seeing, and this is where the contrast comes into play with the court case that we saw, especially starting when we had the hearings on the 28th and 29th, is basically this seemed to be an avenue where a lot of nefarious players wanted to come and do a multitude of things, muddy the waters, shift perspective, try to install sentiment that AMC doesn't have the value of its shareholders at heart. But at the same token, if you've actually had a chance to listen to some of these hearings that took place, I mean, we had people that used Twitter polls as evidence to show why this isn't a good idea. That just that example just shows the juxtaposition to what the 87% voting yes for this conversion and reverse split for AMC moving forward to raise capital for this company, rather than the tinfoil conspiracy theory ridden side of just self-enriching self-interests. And I'm not going to sit here and try to identify how exactly they're trying to enrich themselves, but the extrapolation I'm willing to make is they do not have the longevity of the company at heart. They don't. They could honestly care less if AMC is able to stand on its own two legs and continue to be retail owned. I think that's another factor that's also playing into the background as well. They want AMC to go back to institutions. But among GameStop, AMC, and maybe a few other companies, AMC and GameStop being the two most famous, they're held by retail. So all of this muddying of the waters in terms of sentiment with this judgment is what I think is another method that has been put into practice of trying to get that back to the institutions, AMC. Because when you have retail shareholders that participate with companies like this, you have more voices of the people that interact with your company a lot more than some of these institutions do. They're just, for the most part, I think they're just willing to, kick back, take dividends if they're available, or just play around with the price action if it's convenient. With us, we actually go to the movies. We participate with AMC theaters past being just shareholders. It's our company. And that burns their asses. It really does. No colluding was involved. It was just a bunch of people that saw a movie theater company and said, you know what? I doubt this is going to be closed or go to the wayside, so screw it. It's at a low price right now. Let me get in on it. And after the pandemic and things start opening up, things should be getting a little bit better. That's at least how I thought about it. And then fast forward to now, through all the different various forms of FUD that we have encountered over the last better part of 3 years, this court case is, in my opinion, just the cherry on top to once again reveal what their intentions are. They don't want a company that wants to last for a while, a good long while with retail. They just simply want it back.
I love the analysis. It's a great breakdown right there. The one part where if I were to play devil's advocate, although I agree with everything you said, just to play the devil's advocate for a second, I have seen on Twitter, not names that I look up to and respect inside the community, but I have seen names that definitely have attention at the very least, that are saying that the reverse split, or even they have contradicted themselves. They're saying the reverse split is bad for us as holders of the company, as shareholders of the company, and it's Adam Marin trying to take advantage of us. But even trying to say that point, I do have to say these were the same people that were against the ape split in the first place, which in my mind is a contradictory opinion of, well, if you weren't for the split in the first place, you should definitely be for the reverse split. Someone that doesn't know a ton about the inner workings of how is this going to affect the stock price and everything. Because in my mind, I came here for my perspective. I liked how you were saying, so at the low point, the price is super low. We have a chance to, I don't know if people knew at the time, but we had a chance to save a company. And theaters aren't going out of business. This is the biggest movie theater chain in the world. And yeah, why would I not get in on this? And then that was the start of it. And you were there from the start. I came around 4, 5, 6 months later in April of 2020, after the big boom on the buy button taken away with GameStop and AMC and a few other companies. And because that's what sparked my interest in it. It's oh, what is going on? That's insane. They took a buy button away. And I started doing my education. I got in at the time it was a high price, but now it's a low price again. Around that, I want to say it was $8.12 when I first bought. Shoots to 72. And the reason that I think for people that joined in my time period, because we're all these different aged apes, not in just a literal sense of, we're 18 to 80, but also in a sense of, well, you've been here for 3 years versus 2.5 versus 1. I think that sentiment can change based on that time period. My reason for staying then is that, well, obviously some of it was greed. Some portion was greed. However, my bigger reason for staying, and the reason I'm happy I have stayed and I will continue to stay, is that this is a company I want to see stand on its own. It's a company I want to see succeed. And I also want to see, there's this Irish guy that did a huge rant on a stream one time. He said he wanted to extinguish these bastards. I want to see these guys lose. And the data, everyone that's telling me how crazy I am, which is people that don't know anything about the play. All I have to do is okay, well, you tell me at this moment in time on July 21st, 2023, You tell me why there's 1,000% cost to borrow rates, and why has we've been on the threshold list? I think what 18, 19 straight days.
I think today's day 20 actually.
Day 20, 20 straight days been on the threshold list. The FTDs have consistently been some of the highest in the world. Like the utilization's been 90% plus. It was 100% for so many days straight, months straight.
Mm.
All these things that like there's just so much evidence to point all the data, all the evidence, it points to us being correct. And I think part of that too is playing for that moment of this company's succeeding, it's going to survive, and playing for that moment like, hey, we were right. Whenever that moment comes, whether it's whether it's going to be in 2020, whether it's going to be 2023, 2025, I don't really care. I'm here for the long haul, and I think that's how the 3.8 million, a few 100,000 at least, I would say they're just waiting to get their money back or to make the percentage that they want to make. But I'd say well over 3 million people around the globe, that's where we're at. We're all in a similar mindset as you, as I, and yeah, I started that rant off like, oh, let me play devil's advocate, and I couldn't even do it. I ended the rant being like, this is something that I think we're privy to, that most people, for one reason or the other, just won't put the time into really looking into and really talking about or debating.
Well, one thing that has kept me around with AMC is the fact that Adam Aaron is one of the few CEOs that actually listens to the retail shareholding aspect of the company. Mostly anything that AMC as a company has done since the apes have taken ownership, it's been to benefit, and this is actually where it becomes a double-edged sword, in my opinion, in the right way. AMC gears itself to benefit its shareholders, just like any other company. Now, if you look at the difference between the shareholder breakdown, separating institutions from retail, like I mentioned, before, when you have a group of people that not only invest in your company, but they also participate with it, they commerce at that company, they're going to have more of an immediate boots on the ground perspective on how to potentially improve those relations with that sector of business. So when you actually, that probably provides one of the greatest amount of insight for a company and its board. If I ran a company, that's how I would like it. I want as many voices as possible to give me feedback, not with just the, stupid surveys at the bottom of a receipt that no one answers.
Yeah.
If people are invested with my company, of course, they're going to be much more opinionated. And now develop in the, depending on what that concentration of X opinion, Y opinion, Z opinion, that's how I want to go forward, because these are the people not only putting the money in the portfolios to help us raise capital, but they also help us raise capital on the commerce side as well. That these institutions don't do. So keeping that in mind, when you see things like, an off the rails cost to borrow, or 19, 20 days on the threshold list, and this is the third time this year that it's actually been on the threshold list, it goes to show that the sentiment is still institutions want this company. That to me hasn't changed. Now, some of the tactics that can be used to try and sway sentiment, they might change up from time to time. But when it comes to what the overall end game is, it's to get the company back. And people don't understand, when it comes to my situation, what are you going to do? Make me poor squared? I don't understand. I'm already poor. So what are you going to do? In fact, during this time, I've taken advantage of the opportunities I've had to be able to make memories at AMC theaters. And you know what? So many people have taken the same opportunity, and that to me is much more valuable. They can't take those memories away. They can't tell you that they're wrong. And they hate that, because the only thing that drives them is money. For us retail, we already know how it feels by default being pushed under that thumb. But now we've gotten a taste of what it's like to have that power back. But it's sent us all down in our own ways, our own rabbit holes, and discovered slowly but surely that this goes far beyond things like GameStop and AMC.
Oh, absolutely.
They're symptoms of a much greater illness with these finances. So taking it back from consolidated, over-leveraged powers is just a stepping stone, in my opinion. there's a lot more work that needs to be done in order to ensure fairness as much as you can make it when it comes to these markets.
Completely agree. And I think we, the investors, Dave Lauer, Jay, friend of the show, Jay Brown, I know they've done a lot of work and continue to do a lot of work. And Dave's done it for like a decade plus, way before any of us were paying attention. And I think that's an awesome point you just pointed out too, is that I came on here like talk AMC, and 100% let's talk AMC. That's my play, and that's the community I've been a part of.
Mm-hmm.
However, something I've learned even through the podcast and rabbit holes. I mean, there's a lot of rabbit holes I've gone down just learning, reading books about, hey, how does the market work and all this stuff. But even on the podcast, I talked to some Dogecoin people,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized like they have this same community. They have all these different spaces, and there's like the original picture of the Doge,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been tokenized, so you can own pixels of it. And there's communities of, the nose and the eye. Like these people like become friends online, and there's a strong community that's also just teaching each other the way that I've learned from apes and people involved in the AMC play. I've learned a lot about technical analysis and how to value a company and all these different things. I'd say my ability to value a company really comes more from my professional background, but I still have learned a lot of parts of that from the AMC community, and that's happening inside the Doge community, inside different cryptos and other plays. Like they're everywhere. Like the retail community is millions and millions and millions strong, and it's just multiplying its effect just because every person that gets involved in, whether it's AMC or GameStop or crypto of some sort or whatever it is, you're learning. And that's very powerful. I mean, it takes time. I mean, you've been here for 3 years, but damn, imagine the difference between you now versus you in 2020. And it's just 3 years of time that you spent going down rabbit holes. Financial literacy rabbit holes is really incredible. And honestly, like, if and when we're correct, which obviously, in my opinion, to win, wow, what a blessing that it's actually taken this long. What a blessing that it didn't happen in a month, because now I'm so equipped to take whatever money I have. Right, and everyone's situation is different, right? Some people have $100 in here, some people might have 100,000 in here. Like,
Yep.
Everyone's different. Whatever money you have when you come out of this play, or whatever play you're in, but for now, it's like AMC, that has taken this long, because now I'm gonna be so well equipped to go look at stock charts and go look into different stocks and different companies and figure out, hey, is this a good company? Let me look into the management. Do I like how management runs itself? And all of these different things that I just wouldn't have known 3 years ago. And it's funny because they're trying to crush your spirit, making
Yep.
it this war of attrition. And they have crushed some spirits. I have my own AMC group chats, text chat, and the people that don't pay attention, the people that got in here for, I'd say, the wrong reasons and for the short term, they're holding, but the spirit's kind of, they're kind of just like, yeah, I just want to make money. But the ones that do pay attention, the ones that just have taken this time to learn, it's incredible the distance between them and 3 years ago. It's just, you're going to be so powerful with your money, which is an extremely, extremely important thing to be.
Well, and I think, something to tack onto that too is you're absolutely correct. When me and my wife first got into this almost 3 years ago, I had no idea. I really didn't. And look, I understood, at least by default, things don't move in a straight line. Okay, I get that. But when you start diving into how some of the mechanics are run, to get further understanding on why things are moving the way they potentially do, you start to notice a lot of inconsistencies, at least that are applicable to you. Like just on the individual level, whenever I buy something, how come it doesn't immediately show up on the L2s? Well, turns out that there's order routing available. Turns out that certain brokerages allow different forms of order routing. That's one aspect of it. Also, how is the market able to bolster itself up in certain areas? But then all of a sudden, at least in this case right now with small and mid caps, they're still kind of hitting a bit of the drain right now to help bolster some of the bigger blue chippers like Nvidia, Apple, Google, etc. So you start to learn about different money shifting practices. And then all of a sudden you incorporate things like the bond markets, the crypto markets, the repo markets that I post updates about every single day. You start to develop this string in your mind and kind of understand how some of these things, as by definition, are very different from each other, but they all kind of intertwine to some degree. And understanding that actually led me down the rabbit hole of, these markets, in my opinion, cannot function the way they do unless you have that consolidated institutional control. Because if you had enough of like what us retail investors are doing, then you wouldn't be able to have those concentrated money moves of capital. And that could potentially pose a huge problem for how these institutions have our current market set up. And I think that's also something that they're fighting against, not just trying to take back control of a movie theater company or a gaming company for retail. It's also trying to figure out how to maintain their scheme. But I think that, me personally, I have a very strong feeling there's no coming out of this practicing the same way you did before. You can't.
Yeah, I agree. But my reasoning for that you can't perform the same practices anymore, I think it's because the eyeballs that are on them now. And the fact that we know what we know, that we're paying attention. I think this moment, or the 2020 moment, was what people like Dave Lauer were just like waiting for. It was the moment they needed. It was the match they needed to spark the fire. Because now that we know what's happening, and even if you're someone who is very educated on this topic, on the repos, on the bonds, and how all the market works together.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you're somebody who is less educated, if you have just been involved in the market in the last 4 years, then you have this feeling, you understand, hey, something's up. I can't put my finger on it, but I know this is rigged. I know this is stolen. And you can go watch a movie and figure it out. Like The Big Short is one that I loved.
Mm-hmm.
And the scene in there where one of the main characters of the movie is talking to like his sister or something, his friend in Vegas, like, oh yeah, and I work for the SEC. I'm trying to go work for Goldman.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, shouldn't that be illegal? Like, you can't go do that, like a revolving door. And she just laughs. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, what? No. And there's just all these little tiny nuggets of information that anyone's been paying attention in the slightest. Now we know. Like, we just absolutely know it. And it's really crazy that it went from this 07, 08 debacle of, hey, they did something wrong, to you fast forward that over 15 years, how many people are paying attention and how many people have been willing to learn, and for different reasons. I'm not saying it's because of 08. For me, it was because of a buy button. Like, I saw a buy button get taken away, and I was like, no, that seems like against the rules of the game. And I started reading, and 2-3 months into reading, I felt good about this company right here, this AMC company, this stock. And I talked to a buddy who was in on it, and he's like, yeah, no, you should, and then since that moment, there's been so much more education, especially just from me personally. Everyone attacks it from a different angle. From a technical analysis standpoint, from a reading of a chart and learning about data within a chart. Like, for me, that's my number one education that I've taken away so far, is like seeing the data and seeing the chart and seeing, like, again, the cost to borrow, the short interest percentage, shares on loan, shares available for loan, all of those things. Those were things that I'd never heard of as a CPA. I'd never heard of any of that. I was like, I knew my 401k, and I was like, you invest in the S&P. and you do that for 60 years, and you should be good. But you come to find out, oh, people are using that against you too. It's pretty crazy. Um, Again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's just amazing. I haven't like paused to think about this. I'm watching the stock most days, but I haven't really like had the chance to speak about it again and stop and think about it and reflect on it for a while now. So it's just wild wrapping my head back around everything.
Well, and some of the things that have been happening in terms of, I guess, real life in comparison to what's going off of the charts. I mean, you know, just disregarding, the differences between what the news tells us about the economy, banks, and all that stuff are fine. It's when you start educating yourself and looking into what actually helps make this economy, or not this economy, the markets, because it's weird. They're separated but intertwined. It's a mess. Once again, another problem. But when you have this level of intertwinement in the markets, you first have to create the sentiment. That's the first thing I've learned, because you need a bunch of people in order for you to be one of those economic movers. You have to install sentiment first. So that's where, best example, the Jim Cramers of the world come in. They have conditioned a lot of people, including myself, to think the markets are just a rich person's game. And they're not. The fact of the matter is the markets are in my opinion, supposed to be for the people, but have been bastardized by institutions because they want control. Because I actually have done a little bit of research into the crash of 29, and actually some similarities that I've noticed between the Great Depression crash of 1929 and now is multiple asset class bubbles. Housing, securities, banking, all of it was bubbling. And one of the reasons that was depicted was a lot of people were getting into the markets. Kids, adults, people that had one tooth in their head, everyone was getting into the markets. People that you would never expect. But that's got me thinking. Credit has been around since the dawn of transactions. In fact, that's what some of the earliest writing was. It was the ledger to keep track of credit. Cuneiform. Fun fact. But fast forwarding back to 29, you have a bunch of people that are putting their genuine hard-earned money into this market. Mm-hmm. But it was founded by institution. Institutions always have a ledger of credit because they have to extend themselves to a certain degree, whether it is to, better practices, expansion, whatever it may be. And depending on how far that ends up straying away from the fundamental of the company itself, well, if enough companies end up doing that, well, you have a bubble in that regard. So when you have this retail money participating into the markets in the 1920s, you end up creating this weird black hole to where money is now having a hard time circulating into the real economy, the commercing economy, where real everyday people are going to stores, buying things, participating with publicly traded companies, whatever have you. Their money's tied up with the markets right now. Institutional money isn't going to go out and buy you a ticket to the Titanic or, back in the 1910s or do any of this stuff that retail is expected to do, since we are the primary driving force behind our GDP. It's not institutions buying things, it's retail buying things. 70% of our GDP is concentrated with retail buying. So when you take that variable out of the equation, it's just a ticking time bomb. Hence, why so many people had to be out of work in the Great Depression. 25% of our nation was unemployed. What are we seeing today?
I haven't even looked at the unemployment rates these days. What are we seeing?
They're still tight. They're still around, I think, 3.3 to 3.6%, I want to say. You know what? This will
We
take
can look it up.
exactly. Yep, 3.6%. So, with that being said, referencing some of the past FOMCs that Jay Powell has gotten on the podium, he said the labor market is still tight. We still need to raise rates, not because of institution, because of retail.
Retail.
So there are some similarities starting to present themselves, at least from my perspective.
Interesting.
So when you, because it makes me start to have a spider web kind of thought process here, because if that's the case and you need to artificially destroy demand with retail, then you're creating another different kind of black hole, because so much money has been printed from 29 to now, but over time we've seen the trend to where it services the institution. So it's only digging its heels further into the ground with this fractional reserve system that we got going on. It goes way beyond banks, in my opinion. You do it with basically any type of investment instrument in relation from institution to retail, and you take that, and institutions have been proven to rehypothecate collaterals to show that they don't actually have the coin to back up their collateral agreements. And when that stuff starts to snap back, well, there seems to be a little bit of a contagion. So once again, proving that retail is the one-size-fits-all backstop for all of the nefarious practices of the institution. Me personally, I believe we must continue to work in order to shape the markets to benefit retail. And I do agree with you with the work that people like Dave Lauer have been doing for the better part of the last 10 years. That's a great start. And the more people that participate, it just goes to show that the interest is there. It's kind of like an options chain. If the open interest ain't there, why are you cover calling?
True. Very true. 100%.
So,
the only part of that I would argue. Also, before I even get to that, the August 18th AMC options chain, there's a lot of action there. There's a lot of action there at the moment. And it's a lot around that $10 point, $10 calls, $10 puts. There's a lot there. I can't remember his @, but Orlando is his name. He's not an ape, but he does talk about AMC on his Twitter. He's a big flow guy. He follows the flow. It's how he does his trading and everything. And I've seen it on his. I've seen him share screenshots of the flow. That's a pretty exciting thing. I remember, I want to say it was last year, August 24th. We had a big bump, and it was very similar. People on Twitter were noticing the options chain for August 24th, or around that date. I might not have the exact date correct. And it was a big bump on that day. So we'll see what happens. The past isn't necessarily the future. Trends are just trends, but it is something that's kind of exciting. And those are more the things, again, the data are more the things that I'm paying attention to on the day-to-day. I'm not paying attention a lot to the lawsuits on the day-to-day. Like, I want to see what happens. What's the result? When's it going to end? All these things. But I'm not diving down that rabbit hole as I've gone down other rabbit holes and on the podcast. And anywho, I just wanted to point out that date real quick because it is exciting. We'll see what happens. But the one part I would push back is that it's not even that I think you're wrong. So you're correct when you say institutions. It's not just banks. Like, institutions are also doing this fractional reserve type of deal. Where they just can't cover what they're buying. I do think, and this is my personal bias, it also comes from a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Okay.
I cannot remember the author's name, but Charles Payne has referenced it on his show a few times. And
it's about the inception of the Federal Reserve.
Yes. And it talks about, and the history, the book's actually incredible. I was very blown away by the book. Like, the first thing it does, it talks about, like, hey, this is how this thing was created, and it's very sketchy. It's a very sketchy thing. and like the meeting on Jekyll Island, was how everyone got there, what was talked about, everything. It was very weird, but it talks about the history of banking in general, like
Mhm.
how it started and how it got to where we are today, and it goes through like the European history during the World Wars and all these things. Um, I do think that patient zero, or the main contagion, really is the central banks. That's what gives the other banks, the big banks and small ones, but it's really a cartel both for the top. That's what
Mhm.
gives the big banks the ability to do fractional reserve banking, and then from there it'll go to big institutions and small enterprise. And now, I mean, we even not as allowed, but retail is even allowed to, um, just take out. What's the word I'm looking for here? Um, Trade on blank. What is I'm
Margin.
losing? Thank you. Retail's allowed to trade on margin, um, which I'm not saying retail shouldn't be allowed if the big
Mhm.
guys are allowed. I don't think that's how that should work.
Mhm.
But you see them, at least the mindset come down to us, and I hate trading on margin, and I think that's the one of the biggest wounds, self-inflicting wounds we could give ourselves as a. Let's just take the AMC player for an example.
Mhm.
If a ton of people are trading on margin, that's not good for us. If we're all, and I think the majority of us are doing what I'm doing, which is I'm holding my stock.
Yep.
If we're all just holding our stock, well, we can sit here forever. You can continue to pay that 1,000% cost to borrow rate. Um, that's such an absurd number.
Well, and I think one
It's
thing to clear.
wow.
Well,
Yeah.
I think one thing to clarify too, when it comes to that cost of butter, got to give a shout out to Batman real quick. But with the cost of butter, I've been a part of conversations on the retail roundtable that I do in the morning, where there was a conversation between Batman and Lionvest, and they were exchanging some information, and some of the information that came out, I thought that was very important was, exactly how that cost to borrow breaks down. And from my understanding, obviously it's an agreed rate, but different players get different negotiated rates. Now, also, we could talk about the potential separation between institutional players and retail. So, when retail wants to trade on margin, chances are, and this is just my personal bias, if they're going to participate in trading on margin, however they decide to end up doing it, if they end up deciding to go short, that's probably what they are most likely going to end up being subjected to. Now, also on top of that, with the 973 or 1053%, that ends up being applied is if you end up holding that position the entire year. Now, different, based on probates and things of that nature, if you end up closing out beforehand or rolling it over, and again, that's the other theoretical side of this play that, me and a lot of other people have the opportunity to talk about, exactly how are they dodging from being able to close out their positions and just move on,
Mm,
besides the whole trap sentiment. That's
yeah.
where they end up, me personally, I think, trying to get people in terms of retail, because once again, everyone acts on their own accord. It's a blessing and a curse at the same time, in my opinion, because depending on how some people want to play, some people might be in it for the quick money. So if they see that opportunity and they want to strike at it, I mean, you have just as much of a chance of being able to hit it as you do to lose it, in my opinion.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
when you have the fact in mind, knowing that the what is it? The price action runs based on what the institutions are doing. Because I'm quoting Gary Gensler when I say this: 90 to 95% of retail orders never touch lit exchanges. They always end up getting off exchange. So what we're seeing on the daily, in my opinion, based off of Gary Gensler's quote, this is what institutions are doing. So what we end up supplying these institutions with is just liquidity on the back end. So they end up getting bolstered in their positions to try and continue smothering retail at the same exact time. That's just how I see it.
No, that makes sense. And just for the record, the way you see it is a very educated opinion. You are, again, every morning you're in that round table, you are educating yourself a ton. And every time I get to talk to you, I get to learn. And when I see you tweet, I get to learn. So like, um, yes, it's just your opinion. However, I do want to emphasize this is a very educated opinion for anyone that's listening that might not know Greg. Um, it really is. His anyone that's listening, the at Carlin 2.0 is on the screen. Highly recommend the follow. It's a great follow. Um, I am curious. I haven't looked into this. Do you know how they dodge the? Are they dodging? When you said they dodge and they roll over their position, are they dodging the cost of borrow rate? Do you know how they're doing that? So, and are they? When you say dodge, are they getting away with not paying a cost of borrow rate at all? Is it just a lower one, or like how is that working?
So this is going to start me diving down a little bit of tinfoil territory. So one
Okay.
thing that I mentioned at previous points is the what is it? The stronghold versus the buffer banks. So you have smaller institutions that definitely, in my opinion, do the footwork of some of these larger players. You know, we end up seeing things like Melvin Capital with GameStop. Citadel was the main boss behind it, but Melvin Capital went down. Just for example's sake, so showing some of the buffer entities that ended up taking the brunt of these losses. You know, Ken Griffin and Citadel ended up injecting $2 billion into Melvin to try and help it. Still went, and then Susquehanna ended up giving Citadel $2 billion. I mean, you end up seeing the level of collusion that takes place, and on top of that, whenever it gets it kind of gives me the same impression when it comes to the margin, the cost to borrow rates. Because here's the thing, and this is where I agree with Batman. Something is going on in the background between the institutional players to where the cost to borrow is consensually rising. There's something going on here, whether it is a major player or a smaller buffer entity. They're not closing out their positions, either that or they are trapped. So once again, keeping retail involved in this equation. That's why I think they try to scalp retail from time to time, you know, with these borrow rates and trying to sucker them in. And because they might have some retail convinced, because there's 3.8 million just in AMC, but there's millions more, in my opinion, in
No,
retail
100%.
in general. So when you add that into the mix and you are able to get the jump on your sentiment wagon, then you can start influencing. And then you have people thinking, oh, well, this is definitely a black swan event, but they're not thinking of the black swan event from our perspective. They're thinking, oh, well, the cost of borrow was so high. This price has definitely got a crater. It wouldn't be up this high for no reason. Now, would that sound very far-fetched to tell to an ignorant retail trader?
Absolutely not. Not far-fetched at all.
So that's where it kind of ends up muddying a lot of the logic when it comes to how it should fundamentally go. Because on top of that, you also have lack of transparency with these institutions. You don't know what they hold. You don't know what their derivatives are. I mean, when we saw that bombshell report of the 80 plus quadrillion dollars in the derivatives markets, well, that's great. That's a big, scary number. But how is that distributed? What sectors are getting hit the hardest? Because if you're going to present to me these big numbers, I want to know what they actually apply to. What do they mean? The numbers, Mason. What do they mean? If you played Call of Duty Black Ops, you know what I mean. But that's the thing. You have one side of the coin that has a huge lacking of transparency. We don't know, and a lot of it's theory. And you have certain things that you can go off of that kind of bolster that theory. You know, the $60+ billion of securities sold but not yet purchased. Why was that even a thing? It's because it gives me a better snapshot, in my opinion, to how the institution's general practice is. You're talking about one of the biggest players in the stock market running off of PFOF, completely bastardizing retail customer trades, all with the bells and whistles saying they're $0 commission free. But you pay for that with having your stock diluted in the background.
Yep, 100%. That's something that, on that note, my dad has popped in my head since I don't think he owns any AMC. I don't think I've ever been able to convince him. Even times like now, I'm like, you're playing risk reward, Dad. but it's one of the things that when I talk about PFOF with him, and I'll bring up, Bernie Madoff made it up. Ken Griffin himself was against it. He testified against this before, and it wasn't his. Now it's his, and he changed his tune. And this is what it's doing. It's providing all of this data and all of this front end trading that in all these things. I mean, go down that rabbit hole. But the argument he'll give back is, but it's free. You're saving so much money. It's getting so many more people involved in the market. And my dad is somebody who, he prefers that his kids and people he loves, go build a business, go build cash flow, go bring something that brings back real dividends, if not buy dividend stock. However, he does also believe, and I believe, most people should be involved in the market, and we should get more people involved in the market because it's a way to build wealth. And if you educate yourself and all of those good things, and he says that's just so good because it's free and that gets people involved. And what I push back is, well, yeah, that's why my friends are on Robinhood and whatever it is, and I use Webull. I used Webull for a long time for trading options, but moving to Thinkorswim or TD Ameritrade, where I'm paying $5 for a trade.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that's that. First off, that's not that much money. Second off, if I'm going to be forced to pay $5 for a trade instead of a cent for a trade, then all of a sudden maybe I think more thoroughly about this trade. I think more thoroughly about the price point I want to get on, the stop loss I want to set, all those things. I don't think blindly, oh yeah, if we can get 1 million more people in who don't know what they're doing is better than, well, what if we get 300,000 people in who have some sort of idea what they're doing? I think that is better, and that is a debate, that is a discussion. But I do think that if everyone just blindly is getting in and incentivized, I think human beings, I'm a big incentive person. I think that's how we operate. Don't get me wrong, I think there's bad people.
Yeah.
But we're operating off incentives at the end of the day. We're human beings. That's kind of what we do. I think if you incentivize people the right way, which I don't think this payment for order flow is doing. I don't think it's a good incentive. It's incentive to go gamble. And Robinhood and those companies have been under speculate. I don't know if they've been sued. I want to say they've been sued for
there was a settlement reached with Robinhood.
Okay, that's what I thought. About gamifying the market. I don't think that is necessarily good for the market or good for us. And then you go more deep down the rabbit hole of, well, yeah, payment for order flow is providing front end trading, and these people are able to cheat the game even more so than they have been. I just don't. I understand the argument. I can't agree with it. It's doing more good than bad. In my mind, it's doing way more bad than good. And I don't know, my dad's popped in my head a lot of times about this conversation. That's just one of the things I really quickly wanted to point out there.
Well, and like I said, yeah, you're paying $0 for your trade, and I'm gonna be a real devil's advocate here. Just because of what the community has been able to learn about even pay trade platforms, even. I don't want to give the sentiment that nothing is safe. But then again, it's kind of like that weird paradox. If everyone is participating with the unsafe thing, does that generally start to make it safe over time? More retail that participates with a fraudulent market and more retail realizes that it's a fraudulent market over time, does retail be inspired to turn it into a more retail serving market rather than an institutional serving one? But when it comes to, I think the difference here is, and this is why I believe capital is always trying to be consolidated because it's a lot easier to collude with 35, 40 different people of various institutions rather than, just take the population of America, for example, 350 million, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot harder to, get the game of telephone being consistent than the 35, 40 other guys that are part of multi-billion-dollar financial firms. That is one of the biggest, I think, challenges that us as a populace faces, because we also, I'm going to try my best to just stick to myself. Incentives. I like that word that you brought up, incentives. What incentives do we have as a people to converse with, to communicate?
Are you asking me what incentives we have to communicate?
It's kind of like, it's like I'm asking in general, and then I'm also asking you, like, what incentives do people have to communicate and connect with one another when the paradigm that has been installed in all of us, make that bread. Don't let anyone stop you. Anyone that doesn't support you blindly or 100%, they're obviously against you. That can lead to a lot of uninformed decisions to be made. And we see it with people. Sometimes it can lead to a good thing, sometimes it doesn't. But when you're trying to summit a mountain that deals with an aspect of societal change, being able to step outside of yourself and being able to communicate and connect with more people outside of your circle to understand those commonalities, I think is a much higher challenge than making players like Citadel, Virtue, Susquehanna pay up. Because I believe if you get a lot of people on that same page, sentiment-wise, that we're all being affected in some way, shape, or form, that creates a different level of cooperation. It's not collusion, it's cooperation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Also, I think those two words are, it's a big deal. It's a big deal to use the word cooperation versus collusion, because it's true. 35 people, you can collude. Emails, phone calls. If you really want to, if there's billions of dollars at stake, yeah, you can do that, make that happen. The argument that I saw coming in 2020 was that retail was colluding. This is collusion. That if this was happening on, instead of Wall Street bets, if this was happening on Bloomberg terminal, that it would be called collusion. You can't collude with 3 million people. You can't collude. That's not possible. You can cooperate with one another. I think the voting system, if whoever got 80 million votes, like, you didn't collude to get 80 million votes. 80 million people thought this is the person, or this person's better than the other. Like, you can cooperate, you can work, you can go towards the same point, do the same thing, because it is in your individual interest. Which at the end of the day, I want to see AMC succeed as a company and as a stock, and I want to see the apes win. All of that, even as selfless of a thought as it is my individual interest. That my individual interest is to see the apes win. I want that to happen. I want to see these 3.8 million people win. So I'm going to cooperate with what I feel is best. I'm not on the phone or sending emails to 3.8 million people. It was an absurd allegation on its face. And it was something that I 100% was like, okay, that makes sense. When I saw that quote in particular, like, if this was happening on Bloomberg, we'd call it something else. And I was like, that makes sense. Because I was just getting into this and I had no idea what was going on. And I was actually like, off the gate, I was like defending Robinhood in my head. I think with a buddy. I have to go back and ask him, but it was a buddy from high school that involved in the stock market. And I was asking his opinion about it. I think we have text where I'm like, I don't know. I don't think Robinhood did anything wrong. Fast forward to what I know now. I'm like, okay, I think a lot wrong is going on here.
Well,
yeah.
I think that's an important thing to note, because when it comes to exactly what the end goal is too. You know, if you have enough of that segmented group that has the same end goal and they have to all perform the same actions in order to do it,
Yes.
to me, I think it's not really about the quantity, because I think, you know, obviously it gets harder to collude when you have 3 million people playing telephone. And yeah, I don't want to contradict myself. But what I can say is when you have, like, I'm trying to think of another outside example. If you have let's say we have 4 million people that want to drive with their seatbelt on. Is that collusion against the people that don't want to have seatbelts in their cars to force seatbelts upon them? Or was the practice of wearing a seatbelt was just the practice enough of an incentive, seeing the results from that practice, for people to start thinking about, okay, maybe seatbelts aren't necessarily a bad thing. And then people started cooperating and participating and seeing and appreciating the good practice. All of a sudden, there's seatbelts in every single car manufactured. Is that collusion?
That's an incredible analogy. That's an incredible analogy. Absolutely not collusion, by the way. That's an individual incentive of I want to stay safe that enough people took action on. That's actually perfect. Have you said that before? Or is that on the spot?
I just came up with it.
That is perfect. I haven't heard a better analogy. Wow.
Well, it
Yeah.
comes with the markets. You know, do you want a market that makes you, the individual, money? Which I'm pretty sure everyone that's involved with these markets, they want to make a few dollars. I respect that. Now, something that I ended up bringing up on the roundtable, I think that can be very open for debate, is where is that line? Where is that line that separates making money from outright exploitation and harm of a populace? I
That's a
think
hard
that's a
line to get to.
very good question,
Yeah.
because I believe personally, if you have to deceive people in order to maintain and bolster your value, you've already crossed that line. AMC on the flip side, what has AMC been dishonest about? Nothing. What has AMC done that is anti-consumer? Nothing. In fact, just another point on AMC's rap sheet, they just discontinued the Sightline program. They're not doing seat by seat pricing or row by row pricing. Straight across the board. They listen to their consumers. They listen to the people that participate and cooperate with AMC because it's a relationship. AMC is nothing without its customers or the people to work for them. So they have to find a balance. And now that this retail participation with AMC and this cooperation between various groups, AMC Ideas, AMC Ideas, you have Apes for Change, you have so many different connections that come back to AMC at the end of the day because AMC broke away. Adam Aaron, I don't know if you knew this, but he could have completely made out like a bandit with the Intera deal. Absolutely could have made out like a bandit.
Explain
But
how.
Basically, it would have ended up locking him up to make, I think it was like 1.2 to $2 billion.
Whoa.
And he'd be able to walk away from AMC. Happy as a clam. Made his Billy Plus. He could say, screw it. I'm out. Bye. Y'all figure this out. He didn't. He did the hard thing.
There's a video. The Adam Aaron conversation I do love. By the way, how much time do you have? Do you have a hard stop?
I'm probably good till about like 12:30.
Another about half hour here?
Yep.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know because I could keep you on here forever. But The Adam Aaron conversation is one that I do love with this community. On Twitter, one of the debates, Sal meme lord, he does the blame Adam Arno thing. It does crack me up. Um,
I love
it does
blaming
seem to be a
Adam
point
Arno.
of separation. A lot of people that have like walked away from the movement or are still here just don't trust the guy. Which, by the way, I understand not trusting people in positions of power. I think you should always be skeptical.
Absolutely.
I see your shirt says Kennedy. I don't know what Kennedy that is, but I am a big RFK guy. Kennedy University is how I'm reading there.
Space Center,
Space
JFK,
Center,
baby.
JFK Space Center. So I'm a big RFK guy. I don't know a lot about his uncle or his dad. I'm a big podcast guy. I think open dialogue, debates, conversation is how you learn. It's the best way to find out who somebody is. So I've watched him a ton of hours, like with a ton of different people, and we can get to the RFK thing later if we want to talk about that. But his skepticism for people in power and his understanding of people that are skeptical of him is something I very much respect. And I respect people that are skeptical of Adam Aaron. I really do. I don't think it's a bad thing to be like, hey, we make sure this guy's on our side. However, everything that I've seen, and like, from him talking to the moves being made, I don't see how. I don't see the argument for him being in this for himself financially. I see an argument that he's in this for himself from a legacy standpoint, which is actually one of his one of the videos of him talking to retail shareholders and consumers was after the suicide of the BBBY executive. He was talking about that, and it's like, hey, at the end of the day, money isn't everything. Like, look at what this guy did. Like, I don't know what happened there, but obviously he wasn't happy with himself and was happy with life. And I know, like, I have enough money for myself. My kids have enough money for themselves. I'm here to try and win with y'all, and like, I want to see this through. And whatever's going to happen, there's going to be a movie about it. And it's not the Seth Rogen one. There's going to be a movie about it when it's all said and done. And I want to be able to lift myself. And I have to look into how he could have made out with all that money. I had not heard this before.
Yeah, I've heard various conversations about how there was like something with Antero. Now, there was no deal signed. There was nothing finalized. I guess it was just in talks or something like that. But that's, to my understanding, and you know, this is the one thing I love about this community. If there is anything that I ended up misconstruing or missed, I hope whoever ends up viewing this, you know, ends up setting the record straight, because that's what I'm all about. You know,
Yes.
Nothing is absolute. So with that Intera deal, that's how they ended up getting involved with Ape and AMC. So that's, I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of that and how that went down, but yeah, from my general understanding, it was with Antera getting into AMC and Ape. Adam Aaron he had the opportunity to be able to make at least over $1 billion for himself from that deal. And then basically, from what it sounded like to me, it sounded like the control of AMC would go to Intera.
That was a big concern during the whole time back in August. That was a big concern during that time. Is that Intera was going to take control. There's going to be institutional control.
Yep.
And I know that there's been people. They've sold most, if not all, the position, correct?
And people are Intera.
Intera.
I think Intera still has about 9 or just shy of 10%.
Okay. So, I know that there's a lot of people that were concerned that Intera was just coming in to buy low, cash out high. So I think they bought at 66 cents for Ape. I want to say around there, which now Ape is $1.80 as we speak, somewhere around there. Which also, though, just like that's when I started buying Ape. I sold on my Ape when I first got it, and I started buying it when it hit $1. And I was like, okay, this isn't gonna go to zero. So once it hit $1, I just started putting more money into it. And that one is very worked out thus far, and I think it's gonna work out at the end of the day when it's AMC stock. Um, we will see. We will see. But I know Antero is one that was an implication of Adam Aaron, that people were concerned about that. The one conversation I've had that has convinced me of like, okay, I could see Adam Aaron and the executive team having done this to manipulate retail into buying more. Which, by the way, that's not necessarily manipulating them into a bad decision for themselves. But if they were the ones that paid for the Lamborghini commercial, do you remember this commercial? This is the one thing that I'm like, okay, tinfoil hat. I'll talk with you. There was a Lamborghini commercial, and I don't remember what year. It was so long ago. They don't do commercials, first off. They never do TV commercials. It's not what they do. There was a Lambo commercial where it just showed the moon, and then it said soon, and then it was the Lambo logo.
Yep,
and there was a theory, and I talked to somebody. I want to say it was Kringle Kitten. Kringle Kitten is a memester, and then in real life, he's an investor. He works with a fund, and he said the reason he doesn't get involved is because he just doesn't know. There's too much going on. He just doesn't want to be involved in it because he just doesn't know what's going to happen. It's kind of like for him, it's one of those stocks that he wouldn't buy, but he wouldn't buy the stock, but he certainly wouldn't short the stock. He just doesn't know what's going on. And that was one of the things he brought up, was that commercial. I was like, okay, I could see that. I don't know who paid for that. I don't know what was going on with that, but I do remember seeing that on Twitter, and I remember that circulating in the Twitter. I was like, okay, that one I'll give you. I don't know if you want to put my tinfoil hat on. Which, by the way, if we're the conspiracy theory thing, speaking of RFK, speaking of Kennedy, and speaking and all in the AMC GameStop play, like, you have to be skeptical to have come across this, and being skeptical / conspiracy theory minded, there was overlap there. I 100% understand that. Like, I'm a skeptical person. I think that word comes off a bit harsh. But for lack of a better word, like, I am someone that's like, hey, I'm going to question what you're telling me. I'm not just going to blindly believe you. And I think you have to have that kind of mindset to even find yourself in this play. So when these conspiracy theories come, I don't look at them just like, I try not to just offhand them and it's like, oh, whatever. I try and say, okay, let me look into what you're saying. Saying that I have offhanded a few of them. The latest one is coming from the Republican side of the base. There's a movie, I can't remember what the movie's called.
Sound of Freedom.
Yes. So you've seen, I know you've seen, AMC movie theaters in general. The claim is that they're trying to make it as uncomfortable as possible so you don't watch the movie. I've offhanded that one. If I was going to look into it, it was before I saw the tweet from the guys that made the movie. They said, hey, AMC has been a fantastic partner. These things happen, but like, we thank you, AMC, for being a good partner, all this stuff. So from there, I was like, okay, it's offhanded it completely. If I was going to look into it at all, which I don't think I would have. However, I try not to do that. I try and say, hey, if you're going to come up and tell me something, I'll look into it. And I've been reminded to do that, not just with AMC, but the most recent example, again, is RFK. I think I'm blessed in a sense that I didn't know who he was before I saw him on podcast. And I had none of these preconceived notions of the guy. In a very similar way, very ironically, or coincidentally maybe, I didn't know who Joe Rogan was before his podcast. And I came across him because a buddy sent one of his episodes with a professor. They talk about marketing on there. They talk about the market on there and like finance and stuff. And I had no idea who Joe Rogan was. So I got to watch my first 20 hours of this guy as somebody who, like, is a good guy. He's curious. He's asking questions. He just wants to learn more. And by the time first time he got in trouble was with the COVID thing.
Yep.
By the time that rolled around, I was able to see straight through, like, oh, you're just trying to smear this guy. None of what you're saying is true. None of what the media is putting out there is true. Like, I know this. I watched it, and I've watched this guy. He's just a good dude. And whether you agree with his opinions or not, he's just a good dude. And then it's interesting how that mindset of I'm skeptical of what I'm being told has come into this play, and then it's also like people that are in this play, that mindset's going to keep evolving, and it's going to keep moving, and there's going to be people that, whether they're right or wrong, they're going to keep finding deeper conspiracy. It's just something that I think about when I think about AMC, because I think as frustrated as I get as being, offhanded as a conspiracy theorist, where I'm like, dude, look at the data, like look at the facts and the evidence.
Why is it still 4:35?
That's the argument I will give the people that say we're wrong, is that, dude, if you're saying this, well, it's still at 4:35 or whatever it's at this exact moment. I'm like, okay, that's fair, but it's not going to stay at this exact point forever. And eventually something's got to budge, right? Like, eventually shorts do have to cover. At the end of the day, the thesis is solid as fuck. Are there shorts out there? Yes. Are there probably more shorts than being reported, if not more than the actual flow? From what I've seen, yes, that is most likely the case. Have they covered? No.
No.
I'm going to hold. At the end of the day, it is that simple. And it doesn't need to be more complicated than that. And a lot of people that to argue against the price being at 435, go watch The Big Short. That guy was right for 2 years. He was wrong, quote unquote, for 2 years. And even when he found out he was right, his position was being undervalued because the banks and the institutions weren't where they wanted to be yet. And the music hadn't stopped yet. And in my mind, maybe I'm wrong. The evidence, I'll sit here and debate the evidence with anybody, that the evidence strongly suggests that I'm correct. But, I just think the music hasn't stopped yet. I think there are people who are getting into their positions. And I don't know how that all looks behind the scenes, but at some point the music's going to stop. And I think we're going to see something happen, whether it's this year, next year, 2 years from now. I don't care, because I'm here for the long haul.
Well, me personally, I think it's a bit of a double whammy. The data definitely suggests that the stock should be operating much differently. I agree with you 100%. But on the other hand, you have a system that is completely catered to the nefarious players that are causing this in the first place. So you have the evidence, you have the conviction. Now, for me, I end up falling into a mode where, okay, I have my conviction, I have my data, I have what keeps me sound with this stock. But coming from where I was way more than skeptical as a person. I mean, I had the Reynolds wrap around my head, suffocated. I was in a place for a long time where I always believed that people had ulterior motives. Every single person had an ulterior motive. Everyone's out to get you. Everyone is just self-enriching and egotistical, and they just want to exploit you. Now, that's just to be devil's advocate. I think that's still kind of true for the most part.
I think there's truth there. We're human beings. We're selfish. Right. We're greedy. Whatever.
But I like to think also that maybe it's just also a little bit misguided, because what I deem as selfishness 100% of the time in those days, people were just trying to get their basic shit. That's not always unequivocally selfish to me. I can perceive it as selfish, but that's my perspective. But as I've gotten older and I've been introduced to different people, and I've allowed myself to embrace different perspectives, different know-hows, and how it applies to me as my person, it's defeated those preconceived notions. There are genuine things out there, genuine people, genuine conversations to be had, something that doesn't end up being a transaction. And that, to me, is more valuable than anything. Because if you have people that have knowledge, that is the power. But being able to have those connections and communication, that's where a lot of people, including myself, can trip up from time to time, because it's scary. You feel threatened to a certain degree when you get a little bit of pushback on your ideas, because maybe you weren't an individual that was outspoken all the time. And maybe this was one of the few times you actually stepped up and you thought you had something genuine you wanted to say, and it came from the heart, but maybe the brain hasn't been exposed to enough information to see if the brain and the heart coincide.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people get really, really offended about that, and people get very defensive. And that's where the conversation stops. But, that's why I try to do what I do. We talk about a plethora of what could be considered controversial topics at the round table. But if you conduct it in a civil manner and allow people to speak and give their perspective and allow the pushback to be had, as long as it's genuine and you don't resort to ad hominems or whatever, then you cannot leave that conversation more ignorant than you were going into it. You have knowledge now, whether it's perspective, evidence based on that perspective, or any combination of the two. And it's a humbling moment. And that's where I personally grew a lot, because I'm not right all the time. I'm not.
That is beautiful, man. If my podcast makes it and I'm making my own media company, I'm getting you on a show. I swear to God, you have just incredible. You're just incredible, man. You're incredible.
Just cover my health care. That's all I want.
We'll make that happen. If you don't already have a Kush radio podcast something job, we'll make that happen. But I agree completely. I think the most important thing, and the main point of this show, of this podcast, and 5 years from now, I hope it is something, really is that. I think it's not just me and you. I think there are millions of people like that who understand, not to be conceited American, but especially millions of Americans who understand open dialogue, good faith dialogue, understanding perspectives, understanding we're wrong all the time. I'm going to get things wrong on here. You may get things wrong on here. But we're going to have difficult conversations about difficult, controversial topics. And that's important. I mean, it's important to speak in good faith. Speaking of, now we kind of only have a handful of minutes left here. I would love to hear about what you have coming up, or maybe what you're talking about on the roundtable, what you have coming up personally in your life. And then I'll share what I got with you, and we'll call it a podcast here.
Sounds good. I mean, when it comes to the roundtable itself, I mean, I'm just going to keep doing what I do. I don't have anything planned. I don't have anything big in store. I just at 7:15, I fire up the space. Whoever joins, that's it. And whatever the flavor of the day ends up being. Today we were talking about an ape mutual fund, almost borderlining, social practices. And I'll tell you what, my heart was melting, because there are things that I personally talk about that do deal with more socialistic issues. And hearing that those connections are hitting other people and thinking about other people when going forward, that's personally, if I were to be selfish about anything, that's the impact I would personally like to make. It's more than just you. And that's all I really have planned for the roundtable. For us to realize that it's us, not just me. Because what we do affects me. So if we're all doing good, we're all doing good. If we're all doing bad, well, how do I expect anyone to be doing good? Or if you need everyone to be doing bad so you can do good, are you really doing good? You sure about that?
It's a fantastic point.
So
yeah, absolutely. I love hearing it. I can make 7:15 work. I don't do space as much because I'm in sales now and business development, and my day, what it used to be when I was in consulting was when I'm in spreadsheets or software systems, um, I can have a podcast going, I can have a space going, and all of a sudden now I'm on the phone all the time. So it's just not the same, but I can make 7:15 work. I need to start joining some of those. And then just so you know what I got coming up, and I want to keep talking to you. I want to keep as long as this play is going, and after this play, whenever that time comes, you are a mainstay if you want to be on the Good of Twitter podcast, sir. And it's going to be called the Good of Twitter for a long time now. I think it might have been called Outside the Box Investing because we went from vending machines to AMC. I knew that wasn't going to last. I knew it was a bridge to something. I had no idea it was gonna be the Good of Twitter, but that's what AMC got me. AMC was the reason it's called the Good of Twitter because I downloaded Twitter because of AMC community, and I saw how Twitter can build a community, and I was like, oh my god, this is incredible. And Twitter can be a great thing. What I have coming up on the dockets, though, it won't be a lot of AMC talk. There might be some finance people. I'm in talking with them on DMs on Twitter, but I do have a good amount of Israel Palestine coming up. I'm Jewish. My upbringing, I grew up in a small town, Kansas, one stoplight town, and I was basically the diversity there. There was a couple Hispanic people. There was one black family that was a bit older than me. Not much diversity around, and like it just kind of really affected how I saw the world. Being Jewish, growing up there, especially with my skin tone and like just looking different, being a little different, and it was something that really caught my interest. Fast forward, I learned a lot about what it means to be Jewish, and fast forward to May 21, there's a flare up in the IP conflict, and I'm seeing anti-Semitism like I've never seen before as an adult, and that from that point I decided I'm going to learn this stuff. I'm going to read about it. I'm going to watch YouTube. I'm going to really dive in again about this particular conflict and all these opinions. And now at this point, I have so far now actually as of this morning 5 conversations. A writer from Gaza, a MSNBC analyst, Israeli journalist. I have a Christian, religious Christian American point of view, Israeli critic, and then a European journalist who Israeli critic, writes from the pro-Palestinian point of view. I have all of that coming up here soon, so that'll probably be the focus if you see me on Twitter. I've been very involved in those conversations.
That's really exciting.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So speaking of controversial, I can't think of a more controversial one, to be honest. But it's something I care about. I personally want to find truth, find where I'm wrong. My bias is obviously, I try to find truth and I really do try and live in the real world and try and find a solution towards a peaceful solution. Like that's my goal here. And speak in good faith, argue in good faith, but obviously we all have bias, and my bias is definitely pro-Israel. I have family there, I have friends there that have served in the IDF and all of those things. Just so you know, that's what I have coming up. When you see me on Twitter, there'll be a lot of that talk.
Any ETA on that?
Yes. So the first conversation is going to happen next week with the MSNBC analyst, CUNY educated, something University of New York. I mean, when I see CUNY as on Twitter as a Jew, as a pro-Israeli Jew, I know Jews that hate Israel, but it's never a good thing when I see their name. It's usually some pretty wild accusations of some sort, and MSNBC is definitely comes from a pro-Palestinian standpoint. Not always in a bad way at all, but that's MSNBC's bias, that's CUNY's bias. So that conversation will happen next week, probably get posted a couple weeks from now, and then kind of end of July, beginning of August, first half of August, I will have those 4 more conversations. I hope to learn a lot. I hope to be able to push back a bit and teach as well, because I am pretty educated on the topic. But that's what I got coming up on the docket, and I'm excited about it. It needs to be good faith conversation, very controversial topic, but I think at the end of the day, it should do good for the handful that listen.
Well, and you know what? The one thing that I really admire about your approach is you are purposefully not having an entire panel that only agrees with you. You have people that offer a mix of views. So
absolutely,
the important thing, and like I just mentioned earlier, being able to move forward. If you want progression, you need to be able to have a conversation with some of the opposition. So as long as no violence, and clearly doesn't sound like that's taking place, at least with those individuals, being able to have people come together and have that conversation, that is what educates people. Because my perspective may be a little bit different from yours, just based through my experience alone. You know? So I really want to give you kudos on that. I appreciate that.
I appreciate you, sir. I appreciate you. Again, I hope that it changes perspectives on both sides, and if whoever's listening, every conversation, I hope to grow. And Greg, every time I get to talk to you, I grow, I learn. It's incredible. I look forward to the next time we get to do it, and I look forward to the ongoing battle that we're in AMC. I love being an ape. I'm definitely more of a silent ape these days, but I'm on that stock every day, and you're one of the accounts that I'm looking at every day. So I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing and your mindset and the way that you go about life and everything. So again, thank you for coming on. I held you a minute past I was supposed to, so apologies, but I will talk to you soon, sir. And again, thank you for coming on, everything you're doing.
Hey, thank you for having me on once again, Troy. And, I wish you nothing but the best with your venture, and you're sticking consistent with it, and I want to see it succeed.
I appreciate
continue doing what you're doing.
I appreciate you. I will.